Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar on agriculture that we have today. The unprecedented coronavirus pandemic has led to the economy having its worst year since 79-80. And what's the way ahead? Our expert panel will broadly cover the state of the macro and also its impact on the agriculture. May I now request our Chief Business Development Officer for the National Stock Exchange, Mr. Ravi Varanasi, to provide the welcome address, please.
Thanks, Tirthankar. Professor Gulati, we are privileged to have with us Professor Ashok Gulati from the large chunks of old population have been shut at home. Governments across the world are working towards mitigating the economic and social impact of lockdown and now in the process of reopening their economy. While social distancing and other measures must be sustained for some more time till find the medical solution, it is imperative that social and economic life Europe should be able to run up. India, I know kind of forecast about 1.9% growth, but there are other estimates which have put India also may be good. Against this backdrop, as the mentioned, India seems to have been doing reasonably well under the circumstances. Obviously, the summer crops have the record. The sowing has already commenced for summer crops. The winter crops, the procurement and has been exceedingly good. So there has been a series of measures from the government in terms of liquidity support, as well as agri credit, interest rate subvention, stuff like that. A series of measures have been taken by the government. Some of them are pretty path-breaking, and I'm sides of our expert panel. I once again welcome all of you to this webinar, and thank you all for joining us. Over to you, Tirthankar, for taking things forward. You're muted.
Sorry. Thanks a lot, Ravi. Thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, let's move over straight to the panel. We have, we begin the panel with Mr. Joshi. He is the Chief Economist of CRISIL, an S&P company. By way of introduction, he has extensive experience in macroeconomic analysis and medium-term assessments of the Indian economy. He was a member of the working group of savings for the 12th five-year plan. He's also current in macro.
Culture, but in general about the macroeconomy, we have two distinguished speakers following me, I think, who will talk more about the subject at hand. So I think before one second, I think that's Tirthankar, give me 1 minute. I think there is some sincere apologies for, I think. So what I wanted to point out was that before I launch into India, I think I just wanted to make a couple of headline points. Number one, I think, as we all know, I think this is uncharted territory for every one of us. And the solution will have to come from science. And until we have that, I think we have to keep our masks on and we have to stay put. Our current assumption behind all the macro numbers that I'm going to talk about is that we will get a medical solution by mid of 21, and the current wave is likely to be contained in the July to September quarter, which is as is being predicted, probably in July. So it's about a month late than what was expected earlier. Second point I wanted to make was that this is a non-linear event, and I think humans have very limited ability to understand. The thing to remember about lockdowns is that a 2-month lockdown is not move at the same pace, I think, as it was happening before the pandemic. The fourth point I wanted to make is that incomes will collapse, but the savings as a percentage of income will tend to rise. That is what typically happens during crisis time, and this time also that is likely to play out. How it is impacting us, I think it's actually quite interesting. I mean, if I look at about 2 months since it hit us, the initial talk was about supply chains in China getting disrupted and that impacting us by a shortage of maybe raw materials for pharma or auto. Within a global problem. And I think we were talking about global recession and that hitting us. And I think after another maybe 15 days or so, the virus landed at our shores. And I think it became a very massive domestic problem. So you're getting hit both from the global side as well as from the domestic side. So this is a peculiarity of the virus from the inside, 2.4% with clear downside risks, and minus 5% yesterday. So which is, as Tirthankar was pointing out, I mean, it's probably the worst recession since the 1979-80 when we grew at minus 5.2%. And I think this picture is also not very encouraging. So you entered the crisis with very, very low immunity, so to say. I think the industrial sector was all in the red, as you can see. I don't want to focus on individual items. The colors are doing the talking here. Auto was under deep recession of sorts. I think all through 1919. Whether it is the cargo, it is the passenger traffic, or it is the telecom down. Exports were anyway not doing in the smaller private sector banks. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that when the crisis hit us, already you had too many weak points, and I think those. So you had low immunity to fight the virus, so to say. I think India's response has been every country has as dense as China in terms of population per square kilometer. In health infrastructure, I need not elaborate. It is weak, and if the disease spins out of control, I think the medical overload will be overwhelming. I mean, it has been overwhelming. I think even in very advanced countries, I think here it more. Now, so far, India's strategy has been guided by the above two. I think the control of the virus through lockdowns and through containment, etc. But one thing to remember is that the more you do that, the more government needs to support the economy because you are bringing space. And the package that came out was very obviously clear that you cannot take offset some of these hits to the economy because of containment. So you need to open up. So now we are getting into the phase of opening up, and we will see. India is not a country. I mean, it's a continent, I say, and different parts of India have different levels of COVID spread. So there'll be no synchronized opening up of the economy. It will be very, very desynchronized. I think coming to a little bit on agriculture, I think just to highlight the fact that the first three recessions that India faced in 1958, where we have agriculture expected to do well. I think my colleague, the others are going to talk about it. But the non-agriculture sector is primarily hit. I mean, and the agriculture doesn't have the muscle because it only has about 15%. Its share is about 15% of GDP. So it in no way can offset, but it can provide a lot of relief because a lot of population still depends on agriculture. And I think just to broadly, I think I already spoke about it. I think we've made 4 assumptions. One is on the containment of the virus, which is that we'll peak out in June, July. We'll get a normal monsoon is the assumption number 2. Oil prices always help us. I think so. They are helping us right now. And fiscal support, I think, is now we have changed the assumption. Earlier we expected a minimum fiscal support, but now we are expecting lower than what we expected. So it will not be as per the requirement. It may be it's going to be fall short of the requirement of the economy. I think what it does is it does 2 things. I mean, one, I think it brings the economy into a recessionary phase. Second, I think it will also lead to what we calculate as a permanent loss of GDP. So I just want to focus on 2 charts very quickly. The first one is during the global financial crisis. Actual path is the red one. So this is the first one is during global financial crisis. So you got hit. GDP fell sharply, but it was still positive. And after the crisis, you grew at 8.2% per annum for 2 years. So you were actually able to catch up with the lost GDP that you lost in that particular. Not going to happen according to us, because a minus 5% GDP shock, if you want to recover it over the next 3 years, you will have to grow at 11% per annum, which is very unlikely. So even if you get a V-shaped recovery and a trend level of growth after that, you will still permanently lose about 10% of GDP, which is about 20 trillion rupees. So this crisis differentiates us from the previous ones with this, because in agriculture you could bounce back. So we haven't seen permanent loss of GDP in this way so far. As I was saying, financial conditions in India were not very healthy, and I think the give through this chart is that despite so much liquidity pumping by the central bank, the money markets remain tight. I think the credit markets also remain tight, because there is very little risk taking ability in the system. And also, I think the perceived risk in the corporate segment is high. So the corporate spreads over the G-Secs, I think the term premiums, they are all, I think, in the red, as you can see in the last. So unlike if I were to make a comparison with China, I think in China, these are turning green now, because I think they are pumping huge amount of credit. And I think to some extent, even in advanced countries, I think financial conditions have somewhat eased, but they have not eased in India. So the ability of the financial sector to keep lubricating the economy. And finally, I think on the vulnerability of the workforce, here, I think I would point out construction sector here, which is to some extent linked to the migrant problem also. Construction has, I think, almost half the share in GDP as manufacturing, but employs the same number of people, and it has huge casual labor in it, and about close to 78%. So I think this is a very vulnerable segment, and construction activity did stop during the pandemic. Manufacturing also stopped, which also employs a large number of people. And accommodation and food services, I need not mention. You observe it every day, I think, how badly they have been hit. And I think the Google mobility indicator is more about the trend than about the cycle, because actual fiscal spending is very low. And this is my last slide. I just wanted to point out that there are plenty of risks. Second wave, etc., which we don't know. We don't understand this virus. We are only learning about it. Fiscal support is going to be lacking. Monsoon, I think, if it fails, I think then we have problem this year. It's not only that we need it for agriculture, but I think if I just take a general example, I think for cleanliness, we actually washing hands, etc. More and more now. You need more water even in urban areas, so rainfall becomes very, very critical. And the financial sector stress is, I think, it's skating on thin ice, and I think it can only worsen. So let me stop here, and I think we can take it from here later.
Thanks. We have questions for you already, but here's how we're going to do it. We're going to have the other speakers come in now, and let's have the questions towards the end of the program when we have the Q&A session. Does that work with everyone? I hope that works. So ladies and gentlemen, let me go over to my second speaker now. The second speaker is probably one of our most well-known agricultural scientists in this country. One of the most well-known agricultural economists in this country, Professor Ashok Gulati, is the Infosys Chair Professor of Agriculture at ICRIER. He was a chairman of the CACP, the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. He is also currently on the central board of the RBI and NABARD. He was director of the International Food Policy Research Institute, Washington, for more than 10 years. And without much further ado, let me invite Professor Gulati into the debate now. Professor Gulati, welcome and thanks again, sir. Let me begin with a quick question for you. So, how is the Rabi crop procurement at this point? We've been hearing that it's been a bumper crop, and then the RBI governor said that procurement has been higher than expected. So, what are your thoughts on the procurement? Let's begin with that, please.
Thanks, Tirthankar, having me on this show. Let's start with the good news that Joshi has given us. He has said that all the sectors, non-agriculture, are likely to be in negative, but agriculture is going to be in positive, 2.5% that he showed. So I was very happy to see that. Your question that what is happening to the Rabi season procurement and harvesting right now, what I know till 2 days back, India had almost procured rice, and there is a little rice in the Rabi season, but largely wheat. Wheat had already gone to 35 million tons procurement, and rice is already about 5.56 million tons done. So you have about 40 to 42 million tons of procurement of wheat and rice in the Rabi season. Now, another thing that I would like to put is that what is likely to be the stock on 1st of June that we normally look at against what the norms of buffer stocks are. My expectation is that by June 1st, we will have total stocks of wheat and rice in the range of 95 to 100 million tons. This is way above what we need as a buffer stock norm. The buffer stock norm for July 1st, actually, that is after a month, is about 41.2 million tons or so. So you have against that more than 100% stocks right now. So it's a problem of plenty. In a way, that is a good news that government, if they want to tackle inflation at any point of time, they can easily do by unloading a lot of stocks of wheat and rice. And that's what brings me back to another question that Dr. Joshi was highlighting, that the whole package of 20.9 lakh crores lacks the cash stimulus. It is more on the liquidity side. And cash stimulus, one of the factors maybe the government thinks is it can be very inflationary. And the March-April figures were somewhat inflationary. But that can easily be controlled. I think there is no need to worry about food inflation in the coming 6 months or so. In fact, if there is a problem, the problem is with the farmers in the wholesale mandis and at a farmer level. Onion prices and tomato prices, they have crashed to 4 rupees, 5 rupees, 6 rupees a kg. Azadpur Mandi 2 days back was 3 rupees a kg. That is the tomato price. So I think government has some leverage in pumping in more of cash if they want to. And inflation fear should not be deterrent to injecting more cash into the system. So I am for more cash and no inflation on that front. And stock situation is very comfortable, more than comfortable with the government. And procurement so far has been very good. And the good impact of that is so much money has gone into the hands of wheat farmers at least, that they are buying a lot of fertilizer. The fertilizer sales so far are 40 to 50% higher than last year, which shows that the sowing they are quite excited about for the Kharif season.
So, Gulati, I had a related question to you on this. You see, what you're telling us is that large volumes of procurement this time would also lead to a higher income for farmers. If I see, the situation about 2 to 3 years back, we've had negative terms of trade for farmers. And going into the crisis, we had food prices slightly rising. So this time the income increase for farmers is coming through volume rather than price realization. Is that a fair assumption, sir?
And in case of wheat, it is the procurement price. And the procurement price, since they have adopted that cost plus 50% formula, So the income of the wheat farmer has gone up. But other major crops of Rabi, chana, that is the Bengal gram, or rapeseed mustard, in major states of India, their prices are hovering at 10 to 15% below MSP, right? So, but these are market prices, and every year this happens. So it's not a very new thing because MSP is declared are much higher. Where farmers have suffered most in terms of their income are the perishable commodities. And during the lockdown, it was so abrupt and so sudden that, think about a farmer growing flowers. Now, if there are no weddings and temples are closed and there is no demand, he cannot wait for harvesting. The flower is a flower. Same thing happened with grapes. Same thing happened with even milk and chicken. There was a rumor that chicken may be carrying coronavirus. And all these prices collapsed by 30%, 40%, 50%. So there is a segment of farmers which has suffered losses, right? But then the largest crop of Rabi, that is the wheat crop, farmers, I think in the major pockets, Punjab, Haryana, and Madhya Pradesh. Particularly Madhya Pradesh, I want to highlight because Madhya Pradesh procurement has beaten Haryana like anything, and they are literally neck to neck with Punjab. So there is a lot of money that has gone into the farmers of Madhya Pradesh.
So, sir, this labor shortage that we've been talking about, this migrants going back into the eastern states, that has not affected procurement at all, harvest at all?
This is very interesting, and we were expecting that there would be a major crisis in the mandis, and with very less labor and how they will manage social distance and so on and so forth. I must comment that if there is a model of procurement that has to be learned, Punjab has done an exceedingly good job, about 12.5 million tons already procured. They opened so many centers beyond the mandi system, about 1,800 rice mills where wheat was being procured and kept for storage. And that was to social distancing so that there is no chaos in the mandis. And this required a lot of preparation before that. And I think they have done. The very fact that today India has procured 35 million tons of wheat alone within a literally, 35, 40 days. It started off from 15th of April, and by 24th, 25th of May figure I'm giving you, 35 million tons they have crossed. And this is a remarkable feat that is done in such a short time. And if the government wants to do it, it can do it.
I had one other related question, sir. The buffer stock, the requirement is about 40 odd million tons, 41 million tons. We will end up doing well over double of that, about 95 odd million tons. How do we understand this additional supply of food grain? How can the government use it as a policy lever, or what should be the sense we should get out of this?
Well, this is a hook. The government is following till the time there is a public distribution system which commits for 61 million tons of food grains to 2/3 of the population of the country. Then you have to procure, you are bound to procure to feed that massive public distribution system. The problem with that is the economic part. And the economic part is, think of a poor in Punjab. Now you buy, and most of 75% of the poor are in rural areas.
Yep.
Now, when you buy at procurement prices, by the time it reaches FCI and storage is created, the cost of that, economic cost of food grains, wheat and rice, today is 37 rupees for rice and about 27 rupees for wheat. And you want to sell at 2 rupees and 3 rupees to the poor. Now, it's a huge, humongous food subsidy. Why don't you, in the rural areas, farmers in any case and the poor can easily get at procurement price, even below procurement price. So if you give them cash equivalent, and they will have a choice to take eggs or, better vegetables or cheese or whatever they like. It will be a more diversified basket of consumption which is more nutritious. So I think the minimum that the government should do is to ask all the beneficiaries of PDS system, do you want only wheat and rice, or do you want cash transfers in your account? Why I'm saying this in COVID-19 case, that when there was a lockdown, and even if you want to give more of wheat, where will they go to get the atta? And where will be the social distancing? So the easiest way to reach the people and through Jan-Dhan accounts is to put money into their accounts and let them choose what they want to consume. I think that is the best way to gradually reduce the PDS burden and thereby all these stocking things. The government should always have some strategic stocks, but that strategic stock should be around 20 million tons, not 80 million tons or 90 or 100. And we will go overboard because our prices, if they go beyond international prices, you cannot export these. So you will be saddled and you will be buried under mountains of grain,
which also have limited shelf life, I'm given to understand.
Well, wheat and rice, they have 2 years, 3 years, you can run, and then if you start distributing free, fine. The subsidy in the budget is 1,18,000 crores. But 2,54,000 crores are the pending dues of FCI, which they have been asked to borrow. So the real subsidy is more than 3.5 lakh crores. What are we doing?
Yes. That's a very important point, sir. So let me just come to the next point, sir, on which does link with the points that you made just now. We are talking about reforms. So a large part of the 5-day fiscal package was reforms in the agricultural sector. We were speaking about the whole revamp of the APMC sector, APMC system across states. Agriculture is a state subject, but the central government has made it conditional in terms of raising states' borrowing limits on indulging in certain agricultural reforms. Your comments, sir. I mean, will this really accelerate? What is the real sense of APMC at this point?
There were 11 points on the agenda for agriculture reform package or stimulus package. There were 8 of them which were related to some allocations of this program or that program and some fundraising by NABARD for infrastructure and so on and so forth. The last 3 ones related to the legal framework in which agri markets operate. The first was the Essential Commodities Act.
Yes.
And what she announced was that they will not abolish, but Essential Commodities Act will be applicable only in extreme conditions of something like a war or a famine or natural calamity or something like that. Now, if they walk the talk, and that is the caveat, because I know my great friends in bureaucracy who will always put some footnote here, some footnote there, that if the onion price goes up from 40 to 80 rupees, they will bring back all these controls. Now, if they really walk the talk of freeing up the system, then there will be major private sector investments in the stocking. Now, in the absence of enough stocking by private sector, what happens is when the farmer brings the produce to the market immediately after the harvest, the prices collapse. And there is a lot of wastage because stocking facilities are very limited. And during the lean season, the prices start going up for the consumer because the stocks have exhausted. So you need to keep pipeline of stocks, not just with FCI. FCI can keep some strategic stocks, whatever they like, but the rest of the country has to be fed by the private sector for all the commodities beyond wheat and rice. Even wheat and rice for you and me, we don't go to a fair price shop to buy that, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have trust in the private sector and unleash the so-called animal spirits of major investment in this sector for storage. It will stabilize prices, it will save wastages. So I call this movement like the 1991 movement of delicensing. This is similar to delicensing of agriculture market. The second component of this was the APMC. By APMC laws, a farmer has to bring the produce to the mandi. And I, as a buyer, can go only to the mandi, and mandi have high commissions and all sorts of problems. I don't want to get too much into details of that. Another session is detailed. But this, the finance minister said that they will bring a central legislation, which I presume will overrule the state legislation of APMC. And then as a buyer, I'll have one license to buy from anywhere in the country, from any farmer outside the mandi system. So the mandi system normally has a catchment area and nobody can buy in that catchment area. So in a way that is being delimited, that mandi system will keep operating only within the mandi yard. Rest of the thing, if anybody as a processor or as exporter or as a organized retailer, I want to go directly to the farmer and buy, bypassing the mandi system, bypassing the commission and the cess and whatnot on that, and give a deal to the farmer. It is between the farmer and the buyer, so the farmer will have multiple choices. Now, again, caveat, if they walk the talk and bring this central legislation, because it will face some maybe quite a bit of resistance from Arthiyas at a state level, or some of the states may not be willing to give up that power to the center. But if during COVID you had to create multiple choices to avoid the rush in the mandi, if this crisis is turned into an opportunity for multiple choices for the farmers, I feel it is good and it can be a historical step. The third element of this was literally contract farming. They did not use the word contract farming. But the fact was that as a buyer, I can assure a price to the farmer well in advance when he's sowing the crop. Normally what happens is our farmers look at last season prices or last year prices. If the prices of onion were good, everybody goes for onion, and there is a glut this year, prices collapse. So it's a typical cobweb problem of boom and bust. Now, actually, they should be sowing looking at the forward prices. And the best way to look at that is in the futures market.
Yes.
And that is what your job or NCDEX job should be, to tell the farmer 3 months, 4 months from today what the prices are likely to be. Now, if the farmer is forward looking while sowing his crop, he can be more, it can be more tuned to the emerging demand that buyers actually are expecting in the system. So the demand supply balancing will be much better than looking at the last year's prices and sowing the crop. So this third element is a legal framework for contract farming by the buyers, processors or retailers or exporters or anybody else. So I feel this trinity of Essential Commodities Act reform, APMC reform, and the contract farming thing, although they have been in the talks for almost 2 decades. I remember Mr. Vajpayee's time when the first 2003 Model Act was brought in. But the government, if they have the courage to bite the bullet, and they have done this, and now they have to bring the legislation accordingly, and if there are no footnotes or endnotes here or there, I think this will be good for the farmer and for the country. And I don't hesitate to say the 1991 movement for agriculture marketing.
No, very fairly put point, sir. I mean, as they say, never waste a crisis. I have to ask you another crisis which is sort of looming right now within our corona crisis. We have this swarms of locusts coming like a biblical plague across large parts of the country. 50,000 hectares of cropland getting affected in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh. How worried should we be about it?
When Joshi put his last slide on the risks of corona and other things, he should have shown a locust also. But the good thing, I think there is some consolation that much of the Rabi crop is already harvested in the country. And as I said, we have already done the procurement, stocks are there, and everything is fine. The major Rabi crop. So locust will not find much in the farmers' fields. In fact, the stubble is being burned now, and locust cannot go there in Punjab, Haryana belt and all that. I think where the problem may come, again, Kharif season sowing has not yet started. So you are in a period which is, in a way, if you have to choose the best period for the evil to come, then this would have been the best period for them. Okay, you come in. There would be some damage on the horticulture crops because they are continuously in the field somewhere or the other, and fruits, vegetables, something on that. Otherwise, they will have to feed themselves on the trees around you and me. In Jaipur, if they are sitting, what is the farming in Jaipur? It's only those trees, and they will damage all these things, something, but it will not be a major damage that your, good expectation of Joshi is that agriculture GDP will still be growing at 2.5%. And I want to compliment him for working out this, because I've been saying that agriculture may end up in a positive note when all others are in dire strait. So, corona or locust, agriculture is reasonably safe.
Thank you, Professor Gulati. Finger crossed on your forecast, Mr. Joshi. Thank you. We will get back to you, of course, again in terms of Q&A. Let me just go over now to my third panelist, Simon Wiebusch from Bayer. Apologies for the delay, Simon. Let me just begin immediately with locusts. Since you are from Bayer, what sort of preventive care do farmers have to take? And I wanted to ask on the summer crop, but this seems an apt point to ask you this question. So let's start on that wicket. What kind of preventive measures, or are there any preventive measures to be taken for such attacks, please?
Tirthankar, thank you for the question, and thank you also my former speakers, DK, Joshi, and Ashok. It was very interesting to listen to you so far, and you're attacking me with a question which honestly, literally, is an attack, and I'm not a locust specialist in that case, but I tell you what, been dealing with locusts 20 years. I started out my career actually dealing with locust control in Sudan and Egypt. So to a certain degree, it is something which comes every time. And I think if there was a solution and a predictive solution, then it would be there already. I think in many ways, it has a lot to do with intervening early on. And honestly, at this point, it's basically chemicals that you can employ, but because very often they will find food, whether you like it or not. It is a lot to do with, can you get them at night when they're on the ground? So there's a lot of discussion, the government also supporting this in terms of potentially looking at using drones. And I think that's a little bit where one can learn. And to that point, it's probably really many things. COVID is from an agriculture perspective, it was the best time for the evil to hit. So I would say there is a lot of focus, a lot of discussions, a readiness also to try new things. And I think that's the important part. And trying to get the locust early, trying to get it at night, using potentially things like drones, I think is good ways to at least minimize the damage, which inevitably will be there in one way or another.
Thank you, Simon. I mean, with my apologies, I before I go on to my next question for you, let me just pause you and introduce you to the audience. In my zeal, I overlooked that part. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Simon Wiebusch, he's the Chief Operating Officer for the Crop Science Division of Bayer in India. Everybody knows Bayer, the company. He's the CEO for Bayer in India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. He's got more than 2 decades experience in the agri industry across Eastern Europe and Asia. Prior to his current stint, he was the CEO of Bayer's Crop Science Division in Southeast Asia. He spent about 8 years leading and developing country organizations in Europe before moving into global roles in Bayer for developing go-to-market strategies. And he's held various senior roles in sales, controlling, and general management. Simon, let me get back to you, please. So I will now go to a point where Professor Gulati left. Let's go over to the summer crop. So, the summer crop, we are expecting the southwest monsoons to be upon us, maybe within 2 weeks. Mr. Joshi has already highlighted that, a good monsoon is a very important point for us, not just from agri, but also from a non-agri perspective. I just wanted your thoughts on how prepared are we in the current scheme of things with the labor shortage, with the good, farm incomes being decent. How prepared are we for the summer crop now?
Yeah, I think as I said, we would I have an echo now.
We can hear you clearly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And I need to be with it. I think we were in many ways somewhat lucky that the COVID lockdown happened, whatever it was, beginning mid of March. Initially, everything was shell-shocked and stood, and that was where we all were really concerned what will be the effects. Now, I must say, in contrast, honestly, to China, the Indian government was very quick at identifying what they would call essential industry sectors and support. And therewith, a lot of things started moving. And I think we've gained a lot of experience in the last, 8-10 weeks in terms of how do you deal with the situation. So per se, I would say we're reasonably well set. Now, as Ashok was saying, the mood seems to be rather positive. People seem to be investing. What we do sense, though, there's a lot of concern around labor, as you mentioned, and this is leading to rather erratic decisions. So people were buying in the Punjab, for example, a lot of cotton seeds. And right now, we almost sense that they might be reconsidering and going for corn because they're afraid of the labor, implications of having to pick the cotton later. And this is a little bit what we see around the country. You're all aware, potentially also Telangana went out, which generally I think is a good idea to say, hey, can we not manage our cropping a little bit more proactively? But if it happens too erratic and people have already bought seeds or the seed companies have not prepared for so many seeds being necessary by a shift of policy, then it becomes rather tricky. What I would say the underlying trend from an economic perspective is we believe that farmers are de-risking. They're trying to avoid risk. Yeah? And that's a little bit a topic. They move more into government procured crops or potentially crops where they do believe that the government will give low prices. We see a lot of movement out of perishables still. And I would say the spread is getting bigger. So while Ashok was saying the cost or the price of the tomato to the farmer is very low, if we look at ourselves in the markets here in Bombay, actually the prices are not down. Often they're even up, right? So the spread is getting bigger. And the question is a little bit, are we going to be seeing a too low production specifically of perishables, which at one point will then lead to the famous hikes in prices as we've known them mainly from the onion cycle. So there's a little bit of that concern that we feel at this point. On the other hand, I think what we can safely say is that when it gets tough in India, people go farming. So to a certain degree, I do believe where you have laborers going back, many of them will end up on their own farms. They will go into farming. So the overall assumption that the agricultural economy will be growing, I think per se is correct.
Simon, one of the points that Professor Gulati raised was if we had forward markets, then that they provide a lot more, protective cover to the farmers in terms of what kind of decision making they should have for growing. I see the indecision of farmers today between cotton seed and maize, as you pointed out, as being one of the factors where the lack of forward markets or proper forward markets has hamstrung their decision making. What about technology? How has technology affected Indian agriculture in your sense over the last several years? Has it made us better prepared in some sense to deal with a natural calamity such as this?
I think the underlying trends have been there in India always. I mean, we sometimes talk about our backward agriculture, but you will always find pockets of excellence also in India. What I would say is that the COVID crisis has actually brought things to the fore. So when you look at just simple things, companies like AgriBazaar or Dehat or Big Basket, which to many people were not really known outside of the agricultural community, they have become more of a standard name in the trade because people have started to look, where can I buy fresh fruit, for example, right? So I do believe that we are seeing a little bit of shift towards these type of, may I say, market linkages. And also here again, Ashok, the movement a bit away from fixed mandis might be a support to this. At least this is what I hear out of the area. And what I do have, we have a lot of interactions with NCDEX, for example, where we are looking at, is it possible to build a bit more of a, how can I say, robust futures market? And can we potentially working together de-risk farmers a bit? I don't see a single farmer in India buying a derivative at this point, but I do see that you can, as a input provider, as buyer is one, work together with NCDEX and potentially de-risk our customers. And these discussions are taking a lot more, may I say, attention than they might have had in the past, because we just see the need for them that much more loudly today.
So, my next question is partly to you and partly to also Professor Gulati. One of the things that that came out, if you do away with APMC, is that farmers would have a lot more places to sell their produce. Correct me if I'm wrong here, gentlemen, that the average APMC's coverage area does not really allow farmers to for proper procurement. In other words, we need to have many more markets, something along what Punjab did this time. Then we need such a situation across the country. This is one point, and the other point I wanted to ask you is the legal construct that Professor Gulati was speaking about, towards contract farming. The use of derivatives, as you said, a single farmer may not be going for derivatives, but if you have a contract farming system, if you have legal rights that are protected, then the use of advanced technology, the use of financial, technology like derivatives could be feasible. What kind of, I'm basically pointing to the caveat that Professor Gulati took out. Yeah. If they walk the talk. So how difficult is walking this talk?
Well,
First to Simon and then to Professor Gulati.
Sorry, walking the talk is extremely difficult, and making a contract with a farmer where potentially also he loses against market price, to my mind, is in India not realistic. It's not realistic in many other countries where it's there already, but specifically in India, I see this as wishful thinking. What I do believe is the drive towards FPOs and, let's say, a consolidation of supply will help in all the topics that you were speaking about. Yeah, that the individual small farmer has enough of batch even to sell to a big basket is often tricky. But when you start consolidating a little bit more and professionalizing, and I think this is what we don't discuss enough in the country, is how can you make FPOs actually economically viable? How do you get that management power into an FPO to really be successfully dealing as an entrepreneur, as an economic unit? And then you can also make contracts, and then they can gain and they can lose according to whatever derivatives or things they might have agreed to early on in the season. The individual farmer, for me, is not a contract partner, especially not the small ones, obviously. But Ashok, what's your view?
Yeah,
Ashok, yeah.
I think the direction in which Simon has said that we need to move towards some scale, and the scale will come through farmer producer organizations. Now, to make them work with the big buyers, processors or exporters or others, or even for them to hedge, on the futures, whatever derivatives you want to use, it is not the individual farmer, it will be a group. And we need to handhold them, train them in that process. I remember in China, they had a program of connecting with 1 million farmers, the Dalian exchange. Why don't you start off, or NCDEX starts off, 1 million farmer connecting to this exchange. So it will not be individual, but through the groups. Now, one of the big problems that comes with these groups is that they need a working capital, because they have to rotate the farmer producer organizations. Now, farmers get a credit at 7% or 4% if they are regular in payment, and in some states, in fact, now at 0% rate of interest. But can you imagine the FPOs are getting capital for their working capital from microfinance institutions and others at 18 to 22%. Now, at that rate of interest, I don't think even Tatas and big players can survive. And you expect the farmer to survive and do these things with a credit of 18 to 22%. I've been raising this with NABARD and other forums that we have to ensure, because this is a farmers group. This is like what we made milk cooperatives in the country. Now, if you want to do it for other crops, they will have to be specialized in certain ways. And good thing is, government has announced in the last budget 10,000 additional FPOs to be formed. But as it happens in the bureaucracy, it's a number crunching game, and you just start putting. It needs a lot of patience, hand-holding, expertise, training them, and that is the job. If you want them to use your derivatives, I think NCDEX or your exchange, they need to join hands to take this in a big way. And only then they will do the planting based on future prices rather than the past prices. And I agree with Simon on this question that the contract farming, when you promise a price, but the market price after 4 months, if it is higher, the farmers run away from you. And if the market price is lower, then all the farmers come to you. So this moral hazard, there is a problem. And therefore, but there are cases, successful cases. So we should not be dissuaded that contract farming cannot be done. It is being done at a number of places. Farmers themselves join hands, and major players, some of the exporters right in Maharashtra, Sajadri, they are doing contract farming and exporting even bhindis and others to London market and other places. So it can be done. Those models need to be studied, and the legal framework needs to be refined, keeping in mind the ground level experience.
My last question before we go over to the Q&A from the audience is to all three panel members, and it's on NREGA. So I want to ask, the allocation for NREGA is 600 billion. The allocation has been increased by another 400 billion. So I just wanted to get all three of your views, starting with the Economist, DK Joshi, about is this enough? Is this right? And would we end up? So the questions I want to get your thoughts on are: is it enough? Would we be able to absorb, as Simon pointed out that the poor farmer, poor people, when they don't have anything, they go and farm. So is NREGA enough of a salve for the rural sector?
Well, I think NREGA was supposed to be a support system. I mean, it was when you don't have other opportunities, you provide them opportunities. That was the objective of NREGA. And right now, I think because the worker is returning to the hinterland, and the economic activity in general is depressed more in urban than in rural, I would say that. But I think they will need some sort of support. I mean, if you look at the NREGA, I think you're allowed to work for 100 days. And I think not everybody who looks for employment during normal times gets to work for 100 days. So right now the demand will be even more. So I would think that this amount of 40,000 crore might need to be topped up. And I think so government should also plan how to create productive assets, durable assets, using the NREGA, dovetail it with other schemes. But I think you will have to step this up, particularly because of the migrant issue.
Thank you, DK. Simon, your thoughts before we go over to Professor Gulati?
Well, I would agree. Important is always that any of these money flows are somewhat targeted and sustainable, and I think this is where we should always have the discussion around can we have how can I say? I mean, I'm a big friend of entrepreneurship, right? To a certain degree, can we not make people even more self-employed in the agricultural sector? I know the percentages in India are quite high already, but can we not make people more of businessmen in this whole of a context? And I think the narrative is moving more and more towards it. People have realized that double the income of the farmer literally means the farmer needs to make income, and it cannot just produce food for self-sufficiency and somewhat hope to get by. So I would seriously consider how can one make more integrated business systems in the farming landscape, and this includes financing. I mean, there's very nice things like these what do we call them? You can literally become a your own. I forgot the word. Sorry. I mean, it's in the banking system where you can open up literally a little banking opportunity yourself. And when you look at the digital sphere which is out there today, if we were to say, the an input provider can also sell an insurance, and he can somewhat start making a market and go to a big basket and say, I'll start consolidating the potato harvest, if you like. That type of entrepreneurship, from my perspective, needs to be supported, because we see young people going back to the villages, and they will not necessarily want to be weeding, right? They want to be making money out of agriculture by doing a bit more trade, by potentially literally becoming more digital in what they do. And that is what I would hope would be supported with all these programs a bit more.
Surely does not seem like a short-term kind of reform, but yes, this is certainly a long-term desirable. Professor Gulati?
Yeah, let me intervene here. I believe now is the opportunity to produce these jobs, and that's what we need to be thinking of. Now is the people going back into the villages who have mobile phones. Every construction worker here in Bombay has a mobile phone, right? How can we use that as an income source for him where he's back in the village? And this is not long term. This is very much today.
Oh, duly taken. Your point duly noted, actually. Yes. These are people who have been earning in the urban areas, who have had a skill set, and that skill set should, we should have enablers so that this skill set could be used for, creating the Atmanirbhar, the self-reliance, as they call it, as our Prime Minister has sort of pointed out. A very fair point. Professor Gulati, please.
Well, I have a little different take than Manrega. I think all these migrant people who have gone back, and especially those who have been put in NACs in quarantine, first 2 months, 3 months, they need an immediate cash relief. Anybody coming out from quarantine center should be given at least 5,000 rupees to start with to sustain himself for 2 months or 1 month at least or something. That's the first cash relief. Instead of expanding the scope of Manrega, you yourself said most of these people, those who have gone back, they are having some skills. So you are going to convert them from skilled people to almost unskilled people digging trenches and filling them up. You are going to demote them. It will be a negative productivity you are taking. I would take them on the other side. And what is that other side? You look at what happened in the Great Depression in the US, 29 to 33. Roosevelt came up with a New Deal, and all the major highways of the country were actually constructed during that time by pumping in a lot of money and making infrastructure. Now you look at where these migrant people have gone. They have gone basically to Eastern UP, Bihar. That's where the largest concentration is, something in Odisha, Chhattisgarh, and West Bengal. This is the belt which is having the lowest development indicators. You take any indicator of development and they are low on that. So what you need is, like after the Second World War, US started off a Marshall Plan for Europe, reconstruction of Europe. You need a Marshall Plan, call it a Modi Plan, for Eastern India. And that should not be just Manrega. It should be a massive infrastructure, physical, health, education, skills. It's a special package. And they cannot wait for too long. It should be business activity with the contractors, with demand for cement, housing for all. This is the right time to front load the housing in the Eastern Belt first. Right? And that will create demand for cement and iron, and money will go in their hands and demand for other consumer goods will. So I would urge the government to announce a Modi plan on the lines of Marshall Plan or New Deal of Roosevelt during the Great Depression. And that should be continued for the next 3 years at least, to reconstruct and bring Eastern India at par with the average of India. At present, the average of India is pulled down by Eastern India because they haven't got the treatment and the package that they deserve. There have been governance issues and other things, but a major effort should be made into that. And then you will employ these people in a much more productive manner and higher skills, rather than demoting them to just dig the ponds and fill them up, which in one rainfall they are wiped away. So I'm not for that.
I did have questions linked on this, whether we have the fiscal headroom, but in the interest of time, let me go now to the Q&A, and we have quite a lot of Q&A actually adding up. So my first question here is to Professor Gulati. The question is, how do you perceive per capita income in rural areas? Will high wheat procurement cover up the losses in the rise of number of people and the possibility of loss in horticulture?
Yes, because the area under wheat is way more than in horticulture. And normally, horticulture people, yes, there would be some losses, not everywhere, not all the crops. And as you can see, that Bombay prices are much higher than Delhi prices. So there are pockets where they have been able to protect themselves. So overall, I think the biggest crops, the largest area, 75-80% of the area has got respectable prices. And I would not see the overall average income in agriculture going down. Pockets are affected, but not whole of it.
We have another question, which is from an old friend. What is the solution to the FCI crisis?
FCI crisis, like Air India, never dies, so FCI keeps living because the entire so-called allocative inefficiency. This is allocative inefficiency. There are other inefficiencies and corruption and other things also, high costs of FCI operations, of labor and whatnot. They are all hidden in food subsidy in the name of the poor. So the first question that we should ask is, we want to give literally free food to 67% of population. What have we done for 70 years? What is the percentage of poverty in this country? You double the effort for them. But if 67% of India cannot afford food and they want at 2 rupees and 3 rupees, then God bless this country. Then this system can never be reformed. And this is the problem of the National Food Security Act, which had kept the prices at 2 rupees and 3 rupees. Initially it was for 3 years, but even this government did not have the guts to raise that. It should be linked to procurement prices. Issue price should never be below at least 50%, 70% of the procurement price. You have to move with the times. You are stuck in the mud.
My next question to DK Joshi. Sir, the question is, how long would we take to get out of the current crisis? You in your presentation, you made a point that we are talking about a permanent loss in income. In other words, what I could see from your chart was certainly not to be recouped over the next 3 years. So, the $5 trillion GDP, that number I think is no longer really very realistic. But truly, how long? What kind of when do we actually see recovery? And an added question is, when do we see a recovery in private corporate capex?
Well, I think these are extremely different. The answer to your question can come from coronavirus itself, but it's not a living being. So can't answer your question. So it will be decided, as Fauci had pointed out in US, that the virus will decide when your activities fully resume. So as long as we don't have a durable solution for this, I think we'll be yo-yoing between, opening up, containment, and so on and so forth. So and as I said, different parts of the country will behave in an asymmetric, different manner. It will not be the same. So it's what we assume is, what we do is that we assume, depending on what epidemiologists are saying and what scientists are saying, we take, let's say the vaccine is expected by middle of 21. So we'll take that as a base case. It will take time to come to India. It's not going to be immediate. So that gets baked into the outlook. So it is all contingent on how it plays out. And some are even saying that you may not get a full vaccine for this. So then you have a completely different scenario. So on the basis of assumptions for the pandemic itself, I think our economic outlook is being shaped. And I think right now what we believe is that the first quarter of this fiscal year, minus 25%, second quarter also negative. From the third quarter onwards, I think because we will have contained it to a great reasonable extent to open up the economy, you'll see some positive movement in GDP growth. And if that continues, then next year you will see a rather sharp upward trend. I mean, now this is all contingent on the basic assumption that coronavirus is going to follow this path, about which we are ourselves not sure. So if you believe in these assumptions, then I think we should be okay by 21, 22 as far as the growth is concerned. I mean, you'll be returning back, but I think it will be like a very weak person, I think, trying to run. And so I think that will be that will be the situation, because I think and that brings me to your question of corporate capex. I think we've been waiting for so long for the private corporate capex cycle to revive, and now I think it's going to be pushed ahead, because this pandemic is not destroying physical capital. Physical capital is still there. I think so. You will have to again wait for full utilization or reasonable utilization of capacity. So I think the capex will take a hit. Even the government capex will take a hit, because if you're fiscally constrained, you try to cut down on the capex. So I think the investment prognosis doesn't suggest any hope, I think, in the near term. I mean, that it's going to pick up. I mean, so I would treat this year as a complete washout for investment, and maybe next year also it's going to take time for it to revive. Particularly the private part.
One of the points I've been making in a webinar is that the India story is no longer a movie; it's a 10-season series, and you've just added 2 more seasons to that 10-season series. So, go ahead, Joshi.
No, that's fine.
Simon, question I had when I can read here is these cropping patterns that farmers are showing this variability. Are you likely to? Is it going to be permanent in nature? How is COVID-19 going to affect farm behavior in terms of cropping patterns? Or are we going back to just to complete? Are we going back to what Professor Gulati pointed out in a cobweb model? I mean, we see prices and then we again we plant that crop and next year there is a glut. Is there a permanent behavior change now that can be expected?
When we look at it a bit holistically, I do believe, remember what I said starting, I do believe that in India we're much more discussing about farming as a business. And if farming is a business and there is less regulation on pricing and less licensing needs for mandis, that will lead to more crop shift and potentially also a little bit more, may I say, nivellation and resilience in the overall system. So I would say yes. Also, the government is obviously looking at some of the weak spots. I mean, be it the imports of edible oil, and potentially intervening in that area and saying, we need to have a more concerted effort at reducing our dependence on imports there. Will definitely have an effect. So I do believe we will see a fundamental change in cropping patterns in the country. And I do believe we'll see more variability towards what is a profitable crop, or where is maybe also government-induced need for the crops. So the answer would be yes. At least in the next 2 years, I would expect that, definitely.
A linked question on this front was, can we see a jump in cold chain logistics, given the as Professor Gulati pointed out earlier on, that the impact on perishables has been much higher than staples? Can we expect a jump towards mitigating these losses? So cold chain logistics is one point that has not been touched upon in this webinar. So I just wanted thoughts on that.
I think logistics per se have become much more important. We've had such a impact on logistics, and as we were saying, I mean, even if we're not talking of a second wave of COVID, we're going to be seeing red zones popping up and green zones coming. And that means a more diversified logistics and supply chain per se is going to be important. I do believe there was some specific also announcements on support of localized cold storage. We know of companies which have almost literally like little containers which you can run on solar closer to the farm. And I do see this, and here Mr. Gulati is absolutely right when he says we need to invest into infrastructure, and infrastructure is not just roads. It is also storage capacities, and in that point, cold storage capacities. And these people, as I was mentioning, I mean, if I am an agri-bazaar or a big basket and I want to have a resilient supply chain, I will probably also have to go backward integrated and invest a little bit in these type of areas. So I do believe we're going to be seeing a modernization of stock keeping in the country, yes.
Next question. Any one of you can answer, from maybe Professor Gulati first to field this question. Sir, how can we achieve self-sufficiency in oilseeds?
If you want to, today roughly 65% of your consumption of edible oil is being imported, right? And your crude oil, 80 to 85% is being imported. Now, if you want to say Atmanirbhar means self-sufficiency, in crude oil, can you have self-sufficiency? Well, put all your cars in lockdown condition, that's fine. For a month or two, you can do that. So same thing is the situation in edible oils. The problem is, if you want to produce that much edible oil, what you are consuming through the traditional oilseed complex that we have, rapeseed mustard or groundnut or soybean or sesame, you need at least 30 million hectares more of area under oilseeds. It's impossible. Simply impossible. At the margin, you can do something because 75% of your imported edible oil is basically of palm. And palm is the only plant, only tree which can give you 4 tons per hectare of oil. In other oilseeds complexes, you don't get even 400 kilograms of oil per hectare. Okay? So you have 2 million hectares of palm area in India where it can be grown. The actual is less than 50,000 hectares, I think, even today. Now, the problem is it requires long-term commitment, long-term investments, because for 6 years it doesn't give you much. And then from 6 to 25 years, it starts giving you, and then it matures, and then you have to resell. Now, that requires big corporates to enter. The problem is palm oil is treated as a horticulture crop, not as a plantation crop. You allow corporates in tea plantations and coffee plantations, but not in palm plantation, because palm is considered as a horticulture crop and corporate cannot come in there. You need contiguous. So this is where the problem is stuck. Indonesia has examples where corporates and farmers both have done something. It can be done. I personally had prepared actually a report for the government of 10,000 crores over 5 years. If you invest, then you can reap the benefits for 25, 30 years. But it requires some legal changes. And if we are serious about it, from the traditional oilseed crops, impossible. You block the imports, your prices of edible oil will go up by 50%, 100%, 150%. Area from cereals will start switching. Up to a point, this is okay at the margin. But the moment your area under wheat and rice is under threat, your food security, do you want to first have wheat and rice, or you want to have edible oil for your samosas?
Fair point, sir. Very fair point. Gentlemen, I'll come to the last.
Though, if I may just add one thing, there is ways and means to improve the productivity of the current oilseed crops as well, which I think, Ashok, you know also reasonably well. But it's true. I mean, you're not going to come into self-sufficiency without a significant shift in strategy for the country. And self-sufficiency per se is also questionable whether you want to achieve it because of the cost involved. Can you be as efficient? But to reduce the dependency is possible in the long and the short term with the interventions. And one of them clearly is all palm, but the other one is better breeding, for example, also in soybeans.
Fair point. Very fair point. Gentlemen, I'll come to the last 3 questions now, one for each one of you before I summarize the proceedings. We have reached slightly higher than the allocated limit. So let me start with Mr. Joshi. Sir, what would be the your sense on the fiscal numbers this year?
Well, I think it's anybody's guess. I think obviously, even if you spend as much as you did in the budget, it's going to shoot up. I mean, because your base itself has completely eroded. We are talking of negative nominal growth this year, and depending on how much government decides to spend out of its fiscal coffers, I think that will shape. So right now, I mean, if you go by what is happening currently, even in that case, I think the center and state fiscal deficit is going to be in double digits. I mean, and depending on how government spends, and my sense is the compulsion to spend will increase as you get deeper into the problems associated with lockdown, etc. The economy. So it will move upward. So I think I can't give you an exact number because as I said, I'm not very clear on the objective function of the government. How much are they going to spend? But they're taking a huge knock from the taxes front, and the extra borrowings that they are doing, 4.2 lakh crore, only a very small part of it actually will get into expenditure. It will plug the revenue hole, that I think massive revenue hole. And same is the state with the situation with the state government. So you are staring at a very significant fiscal slippage, not only fiscal deficit but also debt to GDP ratio. I think that will also will be on a very fast upward track this year.
I have a linked question on which I believe you will not comment, but I have to ask you. What are the odds of a downgrade?
Well, I mean, you know, I can't answer that question. I mean, that job is done by S&P, which is my parent organization, and I have no role to play there, and I'm not. I can't comment on that.
Sir, I had to ask. Apologies.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay.
My last question to Simon. Simon's last question. Do you think it would have been better if we had an agricultural export policy? We don't have a good agriculture export policy even now. Do you think we miss, particularly with the point that Professor Gulati raised in terms of the very high buffer stocks, in terms of basically adjusting farm incomes for this high volatility? One is technology. One is you have better access to markets. Better access to markets can not just be in forward markets but also in global markets. So, do you think we are actually missing an export policy right now?
You know what? I think it's a two-pronged. Sometimes I believe we underestimate the consumption power of India itself, and that for me is very often a unique chance that you have. India does not necessarily need exports to survive, and I think sometimes there is a little bit a skewed view on it. So I would rather say let's make sure we have the right consumption in the country. Let's look at especially also nutrition. I mean, there was an important point in terms of undernourishment in the country. And then, yes, go for where it makes sense. I mean, look at Nasik and the grape industry there. It is fantastic. They found a very, very good, nice niche. Now, this year wasn't great because of the COVID situation, but there is the basmati rice. If you do it right, you keep the image of that rice up. Fantastic, yeah. Also, right now, Southeast Asia had poor yields. Rice prices are reasonably high, so it might be a blessing in disguise that we have 100 million tons of excess stock, if you like. It could be a good opportunity to export, but to be a standard exporter of rice, and this is my approach, I don't think that is where you're going to win the war. To my mind, we need to have a crop strategy in the country. Do we have a rice strategy? I mean, you guys can answer this better than I, but we don't take methane emissions, CO2, the whole topic, the whole complex of rice growing should be looked at. And I think when you sit back and say, hey, this is how much I need as a country in terms of rice, I'm willing to have that much water go into it. I will have pockets like high value rice, which literally I drive as a value driver for India. And if I have excess yields, I sell them on the markets, especially when prices are high right now, then that is something good. But per se, I would fix India first before looking at, how can I go into exports? That would be my view on it.
Thank you, Simon. I think you make a point. I mean, we need to get our house in order before we have. But what I was essentially driving at was, do we need an enabling framework in terms of policy? But let me go to Professor Gulati now for the last question. Sir, what do you think is going to be the trend in agri wages? Now we're going to have a shortage of labor on one side of the country. We're going to have a surfeit of labor on the other side of the country. what do you think will be the implications for agri wages now?
Can I, with your permission, also take up the other two questions that you asked?
By all means, sir. By all means.
Because Dr. Joshi refused to tell what the rating agencies would put. So I'm a free man in that sense.
By all means.
Because this is a global pandemic, and what we need to do, all the countries are facing more or less similar problems at a different degree. I think the way we did after 2007-8 crisis, the G20 decided to give a simultaneous stimulus to the entire world to revive the economy in a V-shaped manner. In that case, rating agencies like CRISIL or others, how many of the countries they can, and all the G20 will be downgraded? Fine, the whole world is downgraded. So I would go at present, my feeling is, by not putting cash upfront into the game. And so far we have talked only of the migrants or some front loading of PM Kisan or 500 rupees here or there. The big sharks, the big players, aviation industry and hospitality industry, all are in doldrums. Now construction is in doldrums. If you don't come up with some relief package for them and just liquidity, they will end up within a year as NPAs within RBI. So at that time, you will have to, in any case, fund it through your budget. So better front load what you want to do and do this in a simultaneous manner, maybe G7 or G20 or whatever the way. That's number one on the cash front. My feeling is both the center and the states combined, willy-nilly, they will have to come up at 10% of GDP as their fiscal deficit. Let me put my neck out on this. Because if they don't do it now, they will suffer massive NPAs and you will have to pay for them. It's only a matter of now, you will delay the recovery. So front load it. That's number one on the cash and the fiscal deficit. Then there was this question of, you had asked,
Agri exports.
Agri exports.
Yes.
Rice, at present there is no restriction. And we are exporting, we are the largest exporter of rice in the world. $7 billion we are exporting. Now, you remember the prices when it flared up in 2007 and we put a ban. And then you put a ban and then you forget. For 4 years, 5 years, you forget. There is a ban. And there's a massive surplus and accumulation of stocks. Now, same thing is going. We have surpluses of sugar, we have surpluses of grains. And now if you want to immediately export it, what you are trying to do, you want to give subsidy on sugar exports. What do you think the Brazil and the Australia and the Thailand of this world are very generous to you? When export subsidies have been abolished, they will sue you in WTO, take you on that. So I think there is no long-term strategy. We think our export policy is a residual, whatever is the surplus we can export. That's not how trade policy functions. You have to keep the import and the exports both open on both sides. And if you want to, stabilize a bit, then import tariff or export tariff, whatever you want to use those in a very transparent manner rather than do this subsidization route. This will be in trouble. Now your actual question to me, and that is on the wages.
Wages.
In states, and we have to see. Punjab, for example, if there is exodus of labor, and this coming season, as they are going for paddy plantation, there is a huge shortage of labor, right? And that's what Simon was saying. Many will go for corn or cotton, and government also wants more of corn and cotton. And I feel for a state like Punjab, it will be good if they reduce paddy area. They will save some water. Groundwater depletion is so terrible in Punjab. So if not through electricity pricing, labor shortage may drive them away from paddy. That will be good for Punjab, future agriculture. But overall, in these states of Western India, partly Southern India and Northwest, the wages may go up, but they will go down in the eastern belt because all these people come from farming families basically or landless labor. So if they don't find anything worthwhile to do, then the wages will see a depression. So overall, I don't know where then all India average will stay. There will be pockets of prosperity from where the migrant labor has gone, but I feel many states which are short of labor will try to get them back. Kerala has done a wonderful thing when they were leaving. They gave them good packets of food and properly put them in the rail. Maharashtra, Delhi has been a very different case. I hope in Punjab, we have been discussing, can there be a scheme? One of my friends, Iqbal, says, Ji aaya, the policy, so that if you come back, you get a packet, welcome back. So some sort of that. So each state will have to think about what is the way forward to attract the skilled labor back. But I still feel it will take a long time. The way they have been treated, I think if there is one area in which all of us have failed, Government of India first, the administration, the political masters, and including you and me as civil society, we have all failed in treating and giving them dignity and with respect. All these migrant labor should have been, made to reach their homes, their loved ones. I think we have all failed in that, and I have no hesitation in admitting, including my own role in this. And now, if we have some guilt, then we should give them a good welcome package. At least, we did not give them anything while they were leaving. At least when to attract them back, give them a good welcome package, not for them, but at least to clean your own hearts and the guilt and the blunders we have committed.
Professor Gulati, that's a very sober but a fair assessment. I couldn't agree more with you, actually. So, gentlemen, we are at the end of our webinar. Thank you so much. Now, I have the task here of summarizing what has been discussed now. I have written some notes here. I could read out whatever every one of you have made, but I have the other option as the moderator of also requesting you to summarize your thoughts, any last words in 30 seconds. So let me take that opportunity, please. And I will start with DK now. Sir, your last comments on so the overarching point was the impact of COVID-19 on agriculture. And we had the macro background provided by you. So any last words on this, sir? Your summary or what do you think now? I think you're on mute, sir.
Number one point is that we are still learning about it. So whatever you think is the solution, I think will also keep evolving as you go by. I think so. It's not that I say my forecasts are also, all the forecasts at what speed they are changing. So clearly, I think so. There is a lot of confusion on what is going to happen. The direction is known, but the quantum is something which is going to keep us on our hooks for tenterhooks for quite some time. So what I would say is that it's a I would agree with Dr. Gulati and others. That you need to give a more front-loaded support. So policy is like a bridge. I think it has a role to take you from the crisis phase to the recovery phase. If the bridge is not strong, you will not reach the recovery phase. The second part of the policy is when you reach the recovery phase, you will reach in a pretty shattered situation. So to ensure that you are able to recover. So I think these two roles policy has. Right now, I think it is seems to be focused on the latter part. Okay, we'll keep the ammunition dry, we'll use it later. But I think you also need to strengthen the current bridge. So that's I would like to end on that note that government will have to spend more, I think, than what they have currently committed.
No, I agree. I think the 10% and a part of which was only fiscal, about 12.5% or less, depending on estimates, is not enough really currently to support the economy. Simon, your last comments, please.
Yeah, I like to try to pick something positive out of the crisis, as hard as it is. But you know what? First of all, I do believe, at least up until this stage, and we know things can always get worse, but India has managed to not come from a health crisis to a food crisis. And I think everybody should be super aware of that. And I do feel in my discussions around me, people are starting to realize how important agriculture is and how in the whole sphere. I mean, even when you talk about nutrition, you talk about how do you potentially better survive the virus. It is a lot to do with being well fed. And so there, I would honestly hope that this sticks in terms of the perception of people, how important agriculture is for this country, how resilient it actually makes this country. Imagine these laborers had nothing to do going back to the eastern states. That would be even worse, right? So that is what I would like to see, and use it to modernize. Yeah, and I think much of what the government has been saying has at least given the right indication. Important, Ashok, is exactly what you say, that they stick with it, and not the moment the onion prices go up, they put an export ban again or something like that. So it's really now make the whole topic even more resilient and modernize it. Invest in infrastructure, invest in warehousing, build that capex, put that capex out so that people can later on with OPEX really use it and make the thing more resilient.
Agreed. Professor Gulati, your assessment, please.
My last comment is Modi plan to wipe out the misery of migrants by giving them productive employment in Eastern India. Not just to build roads, but first priority should be PM Awas Yojana. Build all those houses that you already have, promised by 2022, houses for all. Front load that. That will be productive employment where all these electricians, fitters, and mason workers and others, they will get a productive job according to their skills. And agriculture infrastructure. It is the major mandi, storage houses, all these have to be, it's a pathetic situation if you look at on the ground what is happening. Power sector. The power consumption in Bihar or Odisha is 1/10 of the power consumption in agriculture in Punjab or Tamil Nadu or any other place. So we need to do massive things on the power side. Water management. Luckily, this place is better in water table, but then ensuring that 2 crops or even 3 crops can be done, you need to use them properly. Solar is another major infrastructure, not just as a peripheral activity on the houses, but as a third crop for the farmers, because it can be grown in 1 acre. You can have 490 solar trees, literally, of 10 feet high, and with a buyback arrangement, you can augment their income, double their income within a year. Only thing is you need to buy back, and that you should be selling to the cold storages and other MSME sector, which will be food processing sector in this belt. So there is a lot that can be done, but the big point I want to say is get out of the nitty-gritty of marginalism here or there. You need to think big, like a Marshall Plan after Second World War or the New Deal of Roosevelt. Let it be called, I have no problem in calling it Modi Plan for migrant laborers to wipe out their misery. Now you can get some acronyms that are suitable to the masters of today.
Thank you, Professor Gulati. You might just hear a good name out of it, actually. That brings us to the end of this webinar. I take this opportunity to thank all 3 of my panel members, Dharmakirti Joshi, Chief Economist, CRISIL, Simon Wiebusch, Chief Operating Officer, Bayer South Asia, and Professor Ashok Gulati, Infosys Chair, Professor ICRIER. Thank you. I also take the opportunity to thank my colleagues at Economic Policy and Research and Marketing at the National Stock Exchange who arranged this pretty much flawless seminar. Thank you, everybody, and we look forward to meeting again. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.